If you are put off, made uncomfortable by books with sexual behavior that is not wanted or not appropriate, this video may not be for you. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I want to talk about a few books with some skeevy sexual relationships in them. Some of these books qualify as great literature. Some of them do not. But when I watch BookTube, I see a lot of comments when people read books like these that the inappropriate sexual behavior puts a wall up, that they can't read through this wall and they cannot finish the book because the content is that disturbing. So today I'm going to go through some of these books and describe what you may find in them and see if you want to read them. Because as I said, some of these books are great literature. Number one is Sanctuary by William Faulkner, originally published in 1931. William Faulkner was a struggling writer, and he was not making a lot of money. So he decided to concoct a story that would make him money. There is a Southern woman named Temple. She's a college-age girl, and she's going out to have a good time. And since this is the age when liquor was prohibited, they went to visit some bootleggers. And things go wrong. She meets a man named Popeye. Popeye is a morally degenerate character. He is also impotent. He kidnaps Temple. He does something to Temple that is so shocking. Some readers can't finish this book, even though what he does to her is not described in detail. It's only talked about after the fact. I read this book a few years ago for a Faulkner in August book group. Some of the women in that group were really disturbed, and there was a lot of heated discussion because it talks about not only the violation of a woman, but how she treats herself, how other people treat her afterwards. And it really bothered some people. But this book really is one of Faulkner's best stories. The character of Popeye, as I said, is a degenerate, a criminal, but he's a fascinating man to read about. And if you can overlook what happens, the story in the background, I think this is a great work of crime fiction and literature. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, originally published in 1955. This is a very misunderstood novel. It often gets classified as a sex novel. It is not. But part of that problem was its original publication with Olympia Press, which was a pornographic publisher. And the editor of the annotated Lolita talks about a story. When he was young, and this novel was recently published by Olympia, one of his other soldiers in his platoon was reading it. And the soldier threw Lolita to the floor, screaming, "This is effing literature." Now, I'm sure the soldier did not say effing, but he believed he was going to read a sex novel, and that is not it. But the novel is so disturbing because it describes the narrator, Humbert, who takes his stepdaughter on essentially a sex tour of the United States. It is not entirely a consensual relationship, but is the age of Lolita. She is a pubescent girl, and Humbert is in his 40s. If you listen to some people on BookTube, YouTube, you will have them claim, "I could never read Lolita. It is too disturbing." And yes, that relationship is disturbing, but Humbert is not Vladimir Nabokov. Nabokov would not consent or say it is normal for an adult man to have a relationship with a girl that young. He knows it is wrong, but it is the journey of Humbert's mind, his brilliance in English and writing, that makes this an astounding novel to read. And more people would benefit by understanding what this book is about and not thinking it is just a sex book. In 1966, a professor of philosophy known as John Lang published a science fiction series under the name of John Norman. The first book was The Tarnsman of Gore. It was very much modeled after Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars series, where an Earthman is taken to a distant planet and has lots of sword and planet adventures. And the first 6 books of this series are actually pretty good science fiction. Now, one of the things you notice right off in the first book is that this distant alien planet has slaves, and mostly female slaves. And it's just in the background for the first few books. Men have always been fascinated with owning female slaves. If you look at the 19th century painter Jean-Léon Gérôme, you will see a few paintings: Slave Market from 1866 and a Roman Slave Market from 1884. He has a few other paintings in this tradition, but these paintings will show a beautiful naked female being sold at auction. And it is important to understand this because this is very much a feeling of what you would read in the early Gore novels, that a man can buy a beautiful woman for his own needs. As the series progressed, John Norman changed. I originally read these series when I was in high school back in the early 80s. And after the 6th book in that series, something flipped. I was reading it with a friend, and we both said, this is really odd, because the story of owning female slaves switches. Suddenly it focuses on the female slave wanting to be a slave of her male master and have him dominate her sexually. And all the other books focused on that and did not focus on the sword and planet adventure. And that is a tragedy, because the early books in this series, as I said, were really fantastic. But even my high school self understood that women don't want to be slaves. At least, I don't think so. There is a community behind the Gore series that actually believes this. And, John Norman was a philosophy professor. And was he onto something? I just think he went on a wild tangent. But do read the first books in this series because they're good. But the ones when they start talking about females wanting to be slaves, that's when you know you can put the series aside and not continue. Here is a book that almost no one has read: Confessions of a Warlock by Curtis Lavender, originally published in 1970. It is described as a memoir, a work of nonfiction by a New York City advertising executive who is also the high priest in a satanic cult. And in the first chapter, the high priest is bringing in the 15-year-old daughter of some of his coven members, and they are giving her to Satan. In this story, this is an entirely consensual relationship between the high priest, the 15-year-old girl, and her parents. And what the high priest does is take away her virginity. And after that in the book, this high school girl never really shows up again. It is just a leader to lure men into reading this book. And the fact that they're talking so casually, so blasé, about a man in his 30s having a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old girl, and there's no sense of wrongdoing in this story. It is perfectly normal within the context, other than it being a satanic cult. Now, maybe that is the jab that only Satanists have sex with young girls, but I don't think that is it. I think this is pure titillation for the male audience. Now, this book is really one of the worst books I have ever read in my life. I originally read that first chapter in high school. I believe the copy back then was either my brother's or my father's, but I came across this at a used bookstore. a number of years ago, and I decided to read the whole thing. I should have just read the first chapter, even though, as a sex chapter, it's not all that titillating. Just a terrible book. And Bear by Marian Engel, originally published in 1977. This is described as one of the most scandalous novels ever published in Canada. It is the story of a 27-year-old corporate librarian who is sent by a law firm to catalog a deceased client's library. Now, this library happens to be on a basically uninhabited island off a river in Canada. So she goes to this house. She starts cataloging this library. She's been told that the deceased owner had a pet bear, and that bear is chained up in the back, and people say, don't disturb the bear. But this 27-year-old librarian is very dissatisfied with her life. She does not feel that she's achieving everything that a woman could achieve. And to achieve something better in her life, she decides to start up a sexual relationship with this bear. And lots of people threw a gasket. Not real women don't have sexual relationships with bears. That would be animal abuse. Why would a woman actually think that? Why would an author think that is even remotely appropriate? But what I think is that this author is looking at the condition women were living in the late 70s in Canada, in the modern world, and saying, we don't have enough self-empowerment. How can we empower ourselves? And this author decides her character is going to have a sexual relationship with a bear to prove that she is in charge of her life. As a man, I agree that women essentially have the choice to do with their lives what they want to do, even if I disagree with what that is, like having a sexual relationship with a bear. That choice is their own, although there could be some argument that a sexual relationship with a bear constitutes animal abuse and could be illegal. It is still something to ponder. This is a fascinating novel. Lord Fowle's Bane by Stephen R. Donaldson, the first book in the trilogy, The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, Unbeliever, originally published in 1977. The main character, Thomas Covenant, starts off in our real world. He is a best-selling author who comes down with leprosy. And after he becomes a leper, his wife divorces him. She takes his son away and does not grant him any visiting rights. And Thomas Covenant is living in a small town. He is a pariah because he is a leper. No one wants to be near him. But then one night, he is transferred to this magical place called the Land. And in this land, he is essentially the reincarnation of a famous hero. He is greeted by a 15-year-old girl. And he is cured of his leprosy by this girl through the means of magical mud. Now, Thomas Covenant had no feeling in his limbs. He could not touch anything. He couldn't feel anything. He was completely impotent, sexually impotent. But with this magical mud, the feeling to his limbs come back, and he finds himself aroused by this 15-year-old girl, and he commits an act against her will. And that really turns off a lot of readers, because he is supposed to be the hero of this novel, or 3 novels, and yet he has committed a sexual assault. And more than that, this is going to be a story of redemption, because unlike Popeye in Sanctuary by William Faulkner, who was irredeemable, Donaldson wants Thomas Covenant to be redeemable, even though he has committed this heinous act. And there are some really powerful scenes that result from this act. One of them is that his victim's mother has to transport him down a river. Now, normally, if you are the mother of a sexual assault victim, you don't take the perpetrator down a river and deliver him to safety. You want to do something nasty to that man, but she can't. And let's just say that destroys that character, the mother, and that will have consequences in the storyline in future books. If you can overlook that sexual assault And the fact that Thomas Covenant is on a road to redemption, this is a fascinating series of fantasy books. I want to end this video with a book that I have not read, but has a notorious reputation. That is Mandingo by Kyle Onstott, originally published in 1957. It is an historical novel set in the 1830s in the antebellum South on a fictional plantation somewhere in Alabama. And the story is all about sexual relationships between white men and black women. There was an expectation assumed that white men would sleep with their black slaves. But there is also stories of sexual relationships between white women and black men, a big cultural taboo. Kyle Onstott was 65 years old when he began writing Mandingo. He had previously published some books on dog breeding, but he wanted to make some money. He based some of the events on this novel on bizarre legends he heard while growing up, tales of slave breeding and sadistic abuse of slaves. This book went on to be a bestseller, 5 million copies sold in the United States, and all about taboo relationships. Okay, those are some of the books that I know about that have very skeevy relationships. Do you know any books that would fit this category? Leave them in the comments of this video. Thank you for watching and keep on reading.